You have no map, no phone, no compass, just open land stretching in every direction, and you need to get home before dark. Ancient humans did this every single day, and somehow, they almost never got lost. The sun rises in the east, it sets in the west. That sounds obvious now, but for ancient humans, that single fact was the backbone of an entire navigation system. Every morning, the sun handed them a compass, not a perfect one. The sun arcs higher in summer, lower in winter, and its exact rising point shifts throughout the year. But if you grew up watching it every day of your life, you learned its patterns the way you learn a face. You knew where it sat at midday, you knew which shadows it threw, and what those shadows meant about direction. But the sun sets, and that is when things got even more interesting. The stars were arguably the most reliable navigation tool our ancestors had. Polaris, the North Star, sits almost directly above the Earth's geographic North Pole. It barely moves while every other star rotates around it. If you can find Polaris, you know exactly where North is. Hunters, scouts, long distance travelers across Africa, Asia, and the Americas all read the night sky the way you read a road sign. But it was not just Polaris. Different cultures memorized entire constellations as directional markers. Polynesian navigators, who we will come back to, knew which stars rose on the eastern horizon and which set in the west, and they used those rising points as precise bearings toward specific islands. And then there was the moon. Its position at a given hour of the night tells you something about east and west. A crescent moon, depending on the season and its angle, can point roughly toward the south in the northern hemisphere. These were not perfect instruments, but precision was not really the point. Ancient navigation was about reading a system, a living, moving map that was always overhead, every single night. The sky was not empty space to ancient humans, it was infrastructure. Here is something most people do not think about. The land remembers which way it faces. Trees grow differently on north-facing slopes versus south-facing ones. In the northern hemisphere, the south-facing side of a hill receives more sunlight. Grass there is drier, thinner. Snow melts faster. Trees are shorter and more spaced out. The north-facing side stays wetter, with denser moss and heavier undergrowth. If you grew up in a landscape, you absorbed these patterns without even trying. They became instinct. Moss on trees is a famous example, and also a famously unreliable one in isolation. Moss does tend to grow on the shadier side of trees, which in the northern hemisphere leans north, but it is inconsistent enough that no experienced tracker would use it alone. What experienced trackers did was combine signals: moss plus tree density plus soil, moisture plus slope angle. Together, they painted a directional picture. Rivers were another anchor. Most ancient peoples knew their local watershed intimately. They knew which rivers flowed north, which bent east, which drained into larger ones downstream. Following a river was not just survival instinct, it was navigational logic. Rivers do not lie about direction. They always flow downhill toward the coast or a larger body of water, and ancient peoples mapped those flow patterns into memory across generations. Wind was also a tool. Prevailing winds in most regions blow consistently from one direction during specific seasons. The Saharan harmattan blows northeast to southwest. The trade winds over the Pacific push reliably from east to west. Experienced travelers felt the wind on their skin and adjusted their heading accordingly. Animals gave signals too. Migratory birds fly specific routes at specific times of year. Certain insects orient toward light or warmth. Even the behavior of grazing animals, which tend to face into or away from wind, gave subtle directional cues to people paying close enough attention. The land was not a blank terrain. It was a text, and ancient humans were fluent readers. Around 1000 BCE, something extraordinary happened across the Pacific Ocean. Groups of people began sailing out of sight of land, deliberately, into the largest, emptiest stretch of water on Earth. They found islands scattered across millions of square miles: Hawaii, Easter Island, New Zealand. They found all of them repeatedly with no instruments beyond what nature provided. This is considered one of the greatest navigational achievements in human history, and the methods they used reveal just how sophisticated non-compass navigation could become. Polynesian navigators trained for years, sometimes their entire lives. They memorized a mental star compass, a circle of the horizon divided by the rising and setting points of dozens of stars. Each island had a star path. You sailed toward the star that rose above your destination, adjusting as the night progressed and new stars took over the same bearing. But stars only work at night and only when skies are clear. So Polynesian navigators had backup systems layered on top. Swells. Ocean swells are generated by distant storms and travel thousands of miles in consistent directions, largely independent of local wind and weather. A trained navigator could feel the swell pattern through the hull of the canoe, even lying down on the deck with eyes closed, reading the ocean's rhythm through their body. They recognized when two swell patterns crossed and knew exactly where those intersections placed them relative to known islands. They also read clouds. Islands generate their own cloud formations. Heat rising off land creates distinctive cumulus clouds that sit above an island even when the island itself is still below the horizon. A navigator could spot land clouds from 30 to 40 miles away, and they tracked birds. Certain seabirds never travel more than a specific distance from land. When a navigator saw those birds, they knew shore was close. No compass, no chart, no GPS, just a lifetime of pattern recognition encoded across generations and the courage to trust it across open ocean. There is one more piece of this that tends to get overlooked. The technology was not just the stars or the swells or the shadows. The technology was memory, specifically collective human memory passed down through generations. Ancient navigation was not improvised, it was accumulated. Every route that worked got remembered, every landmark, every star bearing, every river junction, every seasonal wind pattern. These were stored, refined, and transmitted across decades and centuries through oral tradition, song, and ritual. Australian Aboriginal peoples have songlines, ancient routes across the continent encoded in songs. Each song described a path through the landscape, naming landmarks in sequence. To navigate, you sang. The melody itself was a map. Some of these songlines are estimated to be tens of thousands of years old, preserving geographical information across an almost incomprehensible span of time. This is radically different from how we think about technology today. We think of navigation tools as objects, a compass, a GPS device, a map on paper. Ancient humans stored their navigation tools in minds and voices. The community itself was the database. That also meant navigation was social. You did not figure out where you were alone. You carried knowledge passed to you by people who walked the same ground before you. Every successful journey reinforced and added to that collective knowledge. And here is the uncomfortable modern comparison. We have GPS now. We have satellites that can locate us within meters anywhere on Earth. But studies consistently show that heavy GPS use degrades our natural sense of spatial orientation. The more we outsource navigation to devices, the worse we become at reading the world ourselves. Ancient humans spent their entire lives sharpening a skill we are quietly letting go of. They did not just know where they were, they understood the world they moved through, in a way that, for most of us today, is almost entirely lost. If this made you see the world a little differently, subscribe. There is a lot more where this came from. Drop a comment below. Could you navigate home right now without your phone? Be honest.